Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this special In Conversation event. My name is Stella Glory. I work for the Communications Department at Vision Australia. And we've not got one but two amazing authors, Chloe Hooper and Emma Visage. And I mispronounced your name yet again. At the moment on screen is our Vision Australia logo with In Conversation with Emma Visage and Chloe Hooper. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Emma's critically acclaimed Caleb Zellick novels have been published worldwide, and the series has won numerous prizes, including a Ned Kelly Award and 5 Davitt Awards. Emma learned Auslan in order to create the character of Caleb, who is profoundly deaf. Chloe's The Tall Man, Death and Life on Palm Island from 2008 won the Victoria, New South Wales, West Australian and Queensland Premiers Literary Awards, as well as the John Button Prize for Political Writing and a Ned Kelly Award for Crime Writing. Her latest book is The Arsonist, which we'll be discussing, or Sarah will be discussing today, and they are both in conversation with Sarah Blowdorn, who is Vision Australia Library's Community Development Librarian. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Aboriginal people of the many traditional lands and language groups from where we are all situated today. We are broadcasting today from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. We invite you today to share questions and comments during the webinar, which you can do via the chat function in Zoom. If you are using Zoom with a screen reader, you can access the chat function using Alt-H, and that's H for Harry. Please be aware that comments and questions in the chat will be visible to all participants, and inappropriate comments will not be tolerated and may result in removal from the webinar. We have never had this experience. While we do our best to accommodate your questions, there really is so much Sarah will be discussing with Emma and Chloe today in this very short hour. So we apologise in advance if we are unable to reach your question. The event is being recorded and will be made on the Vision Australia website link. You've heard enough from me now, so I am going to hand over to Sarah and to welcome Emma and Chloe.
Thank you. Thanks, Stella, and thanks so much, Chloe and Emma, for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. We are very excited to have both of you along today. When we were planning our In Conversation event, we were looking at what our readers at Vision Australia love to read. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise because of the books that are read across Australia and the world, crime often rates very highly. And certainly for our readership, crime is the most popular genre. So it's so wonderful to have you both along. I know you come from two different sides of crime. I don't know if that's the right term, or two different kind of areas of crime writing. Emma with your crime fiction and Chloe with your non-fiction writing. So excited to ask you some questions today. Some of them are for both of you. And it'll be really interesting to see how, I guess, the similarities and the differences in your writing, seeing as you are writing across different genres, but also some questions for each of you about your books, your latest books, and what's happening and what's coming up soon. So let's get started. My first question is for both of you, and kind of as I said, crime is so popular, ranks so highly for readers. Can I ask you both, why do you think that people are drawn to crime stories?
I'll let you go first, Chloe.
Well, I think, Sarah, we have a fascination with stories about people whose lives were going along the regular tracks. They'd woken up that morning and the day seemed just like the day before, and for some reason they are thrust into a completely different world, and often having to confront issues that we would prefer to confront from the safety of our home, reading or listening to a book, and sort of big ethical and cultural and political questions suddenly take place in such a dramatic way. And perhaps if they hadn't crossed one street or received one text message, or I don't know, chosen to camp in one particular place, none of this would have ever happened. And how they cope with the chaos kind of is a sort of a fascinating lesson to the rest of us.
Yeah, I have very similar thoughts. I think, first of all, there's just the joy of story. Human beings are like hardwired to share stories and be involved in stories. And when you've got a crime, you've got a reason to turn pages. So you've got that really basic need, I think, that you want to read about things. But I think it is, like Chloe says, it's that what if. And I think to a deep degree, it's a what would I do? If I was in that situation, would I have, attacked? Would I have run? Would I have hidden? And perhaps occasionally it's a dress rehearsal in your mind as well. I think particularly for women, maybe in some situations you go, I would have done these safety precautions and things. And I think to a deeper degree too, it's such a great way of looking at the world around us. Why do people do terrible things? Why do they do wonderful things? Why are they brave? Why are they not brave? It just raises so many questions, because whether it's fiction or non-fiction, crime has this way of holding a mirror up to what is going on in the world around us.
Yeah, wow, thank you. They're both amazing answers. I think with the we see the increase in podcasts around crime, TV shows and books, of course. And I think a lot of people do wonder that. It's like, why are we so fascinated? Is there something wrong with us that we're fascinated with crime? But I think what you've both said really highlights, the place where it fits, and why that we do have that sense of being drawn to it. Can I ask, are you both fans of the genre of crime writing as readers?
Yeah, I read everything. I always put a little caveat in there, except horror, because it really scares me. Nothing against horror, it just scares me. Anything paranormal horror. But yeah, so I have always read all genres. Funnily enough, I'm reading less crime now, just because there are certain times when in my writing process where I can't read other crime books, because they sort of, the voice gets in my head. So there are long periods of the year where I actually have to step back from it. But yeah, absolutely.
I'm probably not a big crime reader, although having said that, I'm itching to keep reading Emma's book Resurrection Bay, which I started in preparation for this conversation, and found everyone I knew had read it and loved it. So I'm having the same experience. But I do love the mechanisms of a crime book, the way that they do keep you turning the page, as Emma said. And so I'm very interested in the way that genre can, sometimes be used for stories which are less palatable or perhaps harder to, seek out, and whether or not the sort of, I guess, the generic pleasure that of finding out what happened, how to use those mechanisms to, sometimes tell different types of stories. I guess the big difference, isn't it, between nonfiction and fiction, that concentrates on crime, is that with fiction, you get the pleasure at the end that the you know, the world might still be a dangerous place, but the crime is solved. And sometimes with nonfiction, there isn't quite the same kind of catharsis, I suppose, that we can enjoy with fiction.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to ask you both this individually, but maybe before you answer, and Emma, I'll start with you. Would you like to just give our audience a little bit of a preview about your writing? I think a lot are avid readers of your Caleb series, but for somebody that's maybe just joined in today and is new, can you tell us a little bit about that? Oh, sorry. And my question is, what draws you to writing crime?
Yeah, okay. So they're contemporary books, so they're set in, you know, today's world, although I should say they don't deal with the pandemic. So today's word, but maybe just slightly parallel universe. So it's a short series. The fourth one is going to print like next week. They feature a private detective or a fraud investigator, Caleb Zellick, who is, in many ways, I wanted to write a really standard detective, but twist a little bit. So he's very standard in that he's a loner, an outsider, he's a straight white man, but he's also profoundly deaf. So he moves between the hearing world. Well, he mainly, at the beginning in Resurrection Bay, lives very much in the hearing world, but he has to lip read. He is more comfortable with Auslan, but he spends most of his life lip reading. And then with no spoilers, he goes on a personal journey through the books to find out where he fits in his world between the deaf world and the hearing world. So that's my character, who I really enjoy writing because he's incredibly stubborn and he often does things that I don't want him to do. But the very first book, I think I can say with absolutely no spoilers, because it starts on the very first sentence, is he finds his best mate, who's a cop, dead in his own home because Caleb has asked him to help on a case, and things pretty much go downhill from there. Why I write crime fiction? A lot of the reasons why people read it, I think, and I think at its core, it's because I'm fascinated by people. In all my life, you know, I see someone walking past and I go, where are they going? Why are they holding that case? Is it a bassoon? Is it a gun? You know, are they going to, you know, surprise their mother-in-law with a present? Are they going to a new job? You know, I just say, what are people doing? What are they thinking? I'm just fascinated. And crime is just such a great way of putting characters under pressure and seeing who they really are. What is the actual heart of them? So that's why.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. Thank you. And Chloe, I think a lot of people might know your writing from The Tall Man, which is a nonfiction story. But more recently, we have The Arsonist, which is a story about the Black Saturday fires, and one of the, hopefully no spoilers here, one of the arsonists involved in that. What would you like people to know about your writing for somebody that's maybe new to it? I'm so sorry, my children. Yeah, and what draws you to writing about crime?
Okay. Well, I share Emma's fascination with people. So I'm you know, Emma didn't put it this way, but I'm very nosy, and I want to know too what they're carrying, if it's a bassoon case or something else. But I think, you know, anyone who was in Victoria in February 2009 remembers the fires that took place, and we didn't know then, of course, that we would have not just Black Saturday, but coming our way would be Black Summer. But I very early on, it was clear that at least one of those fires had been deliberately lit, and I just couldn't comprehend how anyone could do that. And so I suppose answering that question started me on the beginning of writing my book, The Arsonist. And I knew that it was going to be an environmental story because, and that's certainly something that I'm, intensely interested in, and it's a crime against nature, and I thought it would be a chance to sort of talk about the environment, and also about the psychology of somebody who I guess was looking for their place in the world, a bit like Emma's detective, but perhaps found it in or marked out his place in a very violent way.
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess also, sorry, I'm
That's okay.
running on, but then I guess the question then or of how that fire, affected those around the investigators, because there are detectives in this book, but also the lawyers who represented the man, his family, the families of those who lost loved ones in this fire, I guess meant that there was so much to talk about and wrap your head around.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Chloe. I'd love to ask you more about that very soon. Emma, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about your crime fiction writing. I think personally, I've loved the Caleb Zote series. Like you with horror, but I'm much more of a sook. I tend to get scared of most things. And I was reading it just last night, and there was a scene where Caleb's in an alleyway, which is never a good thing, and I won't give away too much, and I'm just like feeling this feeling of dread. But I really like how you've built the stories. I know I'm not somebody that can usually pick the ending, but there's enough kind of red herrings and clues along the way. So it leads me to the question, what do you think a good crime fiction story needs?
It's obviously different for everyone. For me, it needs a protagonist or protagonists who are multi-layered and flawed and real. So if that's not there, I'm not interested. I'm not... Seems bizarre because my books have got a lot of plot in them, but I'm actually not as interested in the plot when I'm reading a book. I'm drawn by it. I'm interested. I do really want to know what happened and what is going to happen, but it really is the vehicle getting me there. It's the people. So it's very much about the character, and if the secondary characters are good as well. And I want to go into a different world. I want to see. I want to be nosy. Like Chloe said, what's your world like? Who's around you? What are you doing? It could be the same world as mine, but I'm seeing it from a different angle. It could be a totally different area. That's also great. So it really comes down to, am I in the world and am I invested in the people? I don't necessarily have to like them. I just need to be able to relate to them and really be amused, be bemused, be surprised along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we definitely see that with Caleb. I think you mentioned before, he's a frustrating character in many ways because he makes these decisions and you're like, come on, mate, what are you doing? That is not what you should be doing, but he's very real, I think. How do you find that you're able to build and hold suspense and just give like enough of those little clues along the way that people are engaged, but obviously you don't want to tell them too much and you don't want to give away the ending in the first chapter? How do you manage all of that in one novel?
Look, there are a lot of tears. I rewrite, I write, I rewrite, I write. A lot of it's about pacing, and pacing for me is totally gut instinct. There hasn't been a big reveal for a while, so I need to do a sudden change, or maybe there's been a lot, so now we just need to calm things down, learn more about the characters. So it's that feeling of, do you need tension or not? I usuly don't know who the killer is when I start writing, so that helps a lot because I'm surprised. I go, oh my God, it's you. I didn't realize. If I'm really lucky, I work it out somewhere early-ish in the process. If I'm not, it's at the end. But I do a lot of rewriting, and that's where I sort of put the clues in. And if I ever get stuck, which happens all the time, there's this phrase, the sagging middle. of a book when you're writing. It's that, oh, we started off and now it's this. When I get to that stage and I really don't know what to happen, I'll do one of two things. I'll either get my characters talking, I'll just put them on the page and get them talking, and one of them eventually says something surprising, so that's great. And all that talking doesn't make it into the book, that's just for me, you know. Okay. Or I think, what is the absolute worst thing that could happen to this character, so in other words Caleb, for me at this moment? What would be terrible for him? And I go, yeah, all right, yeah, and that's what happens.
Yeah, poor Caleb.
Yeah,
that's amazing. And you mentioned that Caleb, as a character, he is profoundly deaf, which is not something I've personally read. I don't believe in fiction at all, let alone in crime fiction. So it was really wonderful to see that representation on the page. Can I ask what made you decide to create his character and to make him be deaf?
It was a really long process, working out whether I was going to do it, like months and months and months, thinking maybe I couldn't or shouldn't do it. The idea just came. You know, it's often hard to work out where ideas come from. It's only in retrospect that I can sort of backtrack and work out. It's come. It's basically, I think, the idea for his character has been there since I was in primary school. I've always written. I started writing about the time I could read. And if I look at my primary school and high school writing, there's a story about a man who was deaf, a woman who was invisible, someone who was mute. It's just been this ongoing thing. And I don't know why, it's just something I did. In retrospect, I can see it's probably come from two places or three. I went to primary school with a girl who was profoundly deaf, very much just dumped in the school with no help. Which is very normal back in those days. And it's about the time that, you know, you start realising that different people have different lives from you, you know, 9 or 10 or so. So that was there. But on much deeper reasons, I think I come from a very small family. And my only grandparents didn't speak English. They were Croatian immigrants. I wasn't raised to speak Croatian. I only saw them every couple of years. So we had this absolute inability to communicate properly. So that was always there. And perhaps also on a deeper degree, I'm just realising now it's probably because I've always been a bit out of step with things. I just always feeling a bit like an outsider, and I know everyone does. But I also have ADHD, which has, you know, had a big impact on my life. That feeling of why can't I do the things that other people can do? And I also have aphantasia, which means, which by the way, I didn't realise everyone else didn't have, which is I can't see things in my mind. I can't hear things.
Sorry, what was the last thing that you...
It's called aphantasia. So no mind's eye. I had no idea the rest of the world, you know, if you're visual, if you have sight, you have a mind's eye most of the time. I didn't realize you all did. So those things that, you know, how do people navigate the world? So those various things have just sort of layered along the way. And then Caleb came out of it, which is a very long answer to a very short question. Sorry.
No, that's such a fascinating answer. Yeah, thank you. Can I ask, what do your deaf readers think about your Caleb series? Do you get a lot of feedback from that community?
Yeah, I get quite a fair bit of feedback. So far, it's all been really, really positive. I say so far because anytime you are writing outside your own experiences, you are, of course, going to get negative feedback eventually. But yeah, no, so far it's been really, really lovely. Incredibly supportive, actually. I've had a lot of support.
That's so wonderful. I know I definitely within our library service and our readership that people really like to see a vision impairment represented, and also we have a lot of children that use our library service that have dyslexia, and to see that represented in some way is really powerful. I think, like you mentioned, you know, wanting to feel like, where do I fit in, and to see that on the page, I think for a child, but I think even for an adult is really important. So that's great that you're able to do that with these stories, for sure. Chloe, can I ask you, and I think you might have answered this a little bit before, I wanted to ask you about your stories. You're not sorry, story is probably not the right term.
Okay, no, it is a story.
It is the right term.
Yeah.
So your books, obviously, looking at very different things, very different themes. Do you find that the stories you tell require finding, or do you feel like there's something that finds you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that it's probably a bit of a combination of being sort of wanting to find a story, but hope. Well, I guess you hope that you cross paths, and I'm really interested in I guess I'm interested in certain crime stories in Australia which will work on various levels, so that what might seem, I mean, I don't think any crime is simple, but some might appear to be simpler to the outsider who doesn't sort of experience the pain of it on the surface. But I'm very interested in how they can often tell a story about who we are in a wider way. And unfortunately, most true crime stories in Australia really are stories about disadvantage often, and dysfunction. So they're not quite as I lied actually when I said that I didn't like. Well, no, I didn't lie. I told you I didn't read many crime stories, but I'm a sucker for a police procedural. So those stories have a sort of glossy look to them, which often our stories which might not take up much of a sort of column inch in the newspaper. When you start to look a bit closer, they're not so glossy. I don't know if I answered that question, Sarah. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure if you did either, but that was super interesting. So can I ask what your research process is like? Do you do all your research prior to writing, or is it kind of an organic thing that continues throughout the creation of your stories?
Oh, it's an organic thing that keeps happening throughout the writing. And for The Arsonist, it was there was obviously just the most an enormous brief of evidence against the man who was alleged to have set the fire, Brendan Sokoloff. There were just folder after folder of evidence that the detectives had come up with, because they'd had to interview so many people who had unfortunately in the best circumstances lost a shed, but then there was a sort of spectrum of loss, I suppose, from houses to loved ones. But I also, I guess, wanted to know more about fire in Australia, and then I also wanted to know more about autism, because Brendan was only diagnosed after he'd been arrested, and at that point he was in his early 40s. So, which I guess, perhaps not in a sort of dissimilar way to the deaf child in your class, Emma. Brendan had just been, put into the classes throughout school where he had been horrendously bullied. So there was just always seemed to be more to research. And of course, this took place in the Latrobe Valley. So I wanted to know more about coal in Australia and the history of the valley. So I don't know, Emma, if you find this, but the research can be, you can find something, you find nuggets of gold in there, but you're trawling through a lot of paper, and that can be its own, sometimes a kind of addiction that stops you from actually putting the pen down on the paper.
Yeah, the research is a really interesting side of things. I mean, I obviously don't have to do the same amount as you, but I do have to do a lot. I can spend a lot of time looking into things, which is exactly why I try not to do too much before I start the story. It has to go alongside, or in fact, my second book, which actually involves fire, and fire came down, it's about a fire. That all actually was sparked by me reading a one sentence.
It's funny how you start immediately to use, fire metaphors when,
right, it's just there. But the funny thing is, the book started not through a fire metaphor or a fire reporting thing. It was one line in a paper of something that we will all know about now, but no one knew back then. It was about 5 years ago or 4 years ago, which was that the government was testing wastewater to see drug usage in different areas in Australia. And I was like, right. And it's a time it was one line in the paper, it was one line in the book, but the whole thing came from that, even though I was writing about fire. So you just don't know what's going to spark something when you do that research. So you have to keep going. You have to keep going.
That's how In Cold Blood, started, didn't it? With Truman Capote finding, a kind of, a couple of lines in the newspaper, and then heading off to.
Me and Truman like that, yeah.
Same. It's the same. I love in your stories, Emma, they're set in Melbourne. So for our anyone from Melbourne that has joined in, it's really nice to kind of, hear you talk about the different places that we all know very well. So I imagine there might be a lot of traipsing around Melbourne to check out different locations and things like that as well.
I get a lot of feedback on my commenting on the 86 tram that goes up Smith Street. I was really surprised how many people know the 86 tram.
Yeah, and Chloe, in your books, I know for the Tourmaine, you spend a lot of time on Palm Island and kind of understanding the culture and the environment there, and also in the Arsonist, you talk about spending time in the Latrobe Valley and in the places where this fire just ravaged. I was recently in I've gone blank, Kings Lake, and saw the memorial to the fire, and I made sure I stopped because I just finished your book, but it's really I guess sobering to be in places where these things have occurred, and I think it gives a real sense of atmosphere when you can really see what it's like. Did you find that in your writing that being there really added that richness to your story?
Oh, absolutely. I sort of can't imagine, other writers, I guess, must have an extremely developed sense of, is it aphantasia?
Aphantasia means you haven't got it.
Oh, all right. Well, they must have amazing fantasia.
Hyperphantasia.
Because they don't go to places. And I just think that's, you lose so much by not actually arriving and getting a sense of the community. And you can't write about the Latrobe Valley, or I couldn't at that point, without going and seeing Hazelwood Power Station, which was, it was like that sort of, it was monolithic on the horizon. Wherever you turned, you could see it. And Brendan had grown up, basically with a view of it from, if not quite his sort of, back garden, then, you're driving around in Churchill nearby, and it's sort of through the tree line all the time. His father worked there. And in terms of a sense of place, I even started to think how geology, actually has an effect on the stories that, we're not even always aware of, and how extraordinary that running under the valley was sort of the greatest brown coal field in the world, and that actually coal is this sort of combustible substance that you cut out, and then if you kind of put it into a power station, you've actually got the sort of vapors of instability, clouding over this area, where actually there was, you know, an enormous number of deliberately lit fires, you know, which is the case often when there is high unemployment and, you know, a high degree of generational welfare dependency. So it almost seemed as though, you know, the coal had, you know, created the circumstances, not just for, well, you know, literally for the fire.
Wow, yeah, absolutely amazing. There's a few questions coming through from everyone, so I'll get to them soon. I had one more question I wanted to ask you about the battle of good versus evil. Just a small question, just a small, a small theme. I kind of wanted to ask how important do you both think, and I guess it will be very different because I guess, Chloe, you know, if you're writing about a crime, you know the perpetrator of the crime already, and like you said before, we kind of know the ending. Yes. And likely different for you, Emma, kind of working out as you go along who did perpetrate the crime. Do you think it's important to have a bad guy in a story, and how do you represent this well?
Oh, that's really interesting. In fiction, because I think it's quite different in non-fiction. I think the most important thing in how to represent it well is to always keep in mind that every person is the hero of their own story. So it's not, say, a DC comic, you know, with the bad guys in their lair going, ha, 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 I'm going to dominate the world. It's about why are they doing it? And they have absolutely valid reasons for doing it. They deserve whatever they're doing. The thing that I find tricky personally is because my books are 100% written from Caleb's point of view, is to try and make that possible. Because if I spend too much time focusing on the bad guy, it just doesn't quite, you know, feel right. It'd actually be quite interesting to write a book from both perspectives. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, she starts thinking. So I think, yeah, they are people and they have wants and needs, and that's how it works. I'd be really interested to get Chloe's perspective on this because one of the things I don't do is read much non-fiction crime because I think, well, probably for two reasons. One is that I often find it very, very upsetting. I just find it very, very confronting. And the other reason is because I can find it quite uncomfortably voyeuristic. But you get writers like Chloe, like Helen Garner, those layers that you're talking about the why, they're the books that I'm incredibly, incredibly drawn to. And I think it's because you're looking at why the person is doing those things and you're looking at the impact on the people around, exactly like Chloe's been, you know, talking about. So I'm fascinated to see what you say.
Oh, thank you. Look, I think that the kind of bad guys in my non-fiction crime books, well, the two of them have been, you know, complicated for me to deal with and complicated for readers to deal with because, you know, as Emma said, we want a bad guy, and it makes the you know, tale kind of more easily digestible and you know, kind of satisfying. And I think the whole country was so thrilled when the little girl Cleo Smith was found recently, and yet we don't, you know, to think about what her abductor's life might be like, which I think could be very complicated, is something which, you know, it takes away a little bit from the pleasure of finding the bad guy. And I think that Chris Hurley in The Tall Man, my book, who was responsible for Cameron Doomadgee's death, although he claims it was an accident, you know, he had I remember being slightly disappointed when I found out that in a lot of communities, he was considered a fantastic cop by the Indigenous communities he'd worked with, and was held in high esteem. And so immediately there's a more nuanced picture of a person and of what had taken place in that community. And, a lot of people don't like that I've kind of tried to investigate a little bit more about the different sides of Chris Hurley. And I think some readers also haven't liked that I've looked at the arsonist with a degree of sympathy, because what he did was so atrocious, but trying to understand why he did it, and everything that had happened to him in his life before that moment does make perhaps the crime more explicable, but also it's confronting for us about how we might sometimes be complicit in people being disenfranchised from the community, especially if they are different and, as he was, neuroatypical.
Yeah, thank you. I think that really highlights how important your stories are. I certainly think recently finishing The Arsonist, and I had a sense I really wanted a bad guy that was just evil and you could really hate him.
Yes.
But of course in Brendan we didn't get that. He was neurodiverse, and there's so many factors that played into the events that occurred on Black Saturday, but well beyond that, or beyond and prior to that. So thank you. That was such a perfect answer to that. So much to think about there. All right, let me move to some questions from our audience. Well, this is a good one, and this talks a bit about the research process. So Benita's asked, if you're writing a book in contemporary times, how much research are you needing to put into looking into like police and court procedures and things like that?
It's a really interesting thing, that the police and forensic side of things, because if you put too much in, it becomes like a handbook about forensics or police procedural and procedures and stuff. And for me, it can really bog things down. But on the same hand, it's got to feel real. And you don't want people going, if you're, it's a little bit like riding in Melbourne. If you say that a multi-lane highway is a one-way street, it's going to pull readers out of the moment. So the same thing with police information. So what I do is I write the book, and then I check anytime I've mentioned anything to do with forensics or police, that I check that it's at least accurate enough to be believable. So things like the books are partly set in the small town of Resurrection Bay. It's about 3,000 people. I think that the most senior cop's going to be a sergeant, and there are going to be 2 police cars. So I ring a town with a similar, size police station. I say, who's your most senior police? How many cars have you got? So it's just that little sort of dabbing in the info along the way.
Benita, that's a great question, and I actually also spent a lot of time interviewing, which I didn't mention. So I drove the police and the lawyers who were involved in the arsonist crazy, and one of the forensic scientists crazy, just sort of going back and asking sort of more and more information, and well, Emma's right, because most of it you would never use, but you just don't know. I guess it's like sifting through transcripts of courtroom days, or in different inquiries into other fires or deaths in custody. You just don't know when the person you're interviewing or when you're reading, will return you a kind of a bit of treasure which will work on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. This one's for you, Chloe, from Ria. I hope I'm saying these right. Do you think there's an appetite for environmental crime omnicide or maladministration at the moment?
Oh, I think absolutely. I mean, and there are such incredible stories really waiting to be told, I think, about in this area. There are, I think that there's so much going on which we don't know about and we should know about. And Raya, if you're writing this, strength to your arm, I think it's an incredibly important area.
Absolutely. That probably leads into the question. What are you guys writing at the moment? What's next, if you're allowed to share?
I am in the very early stages of thinking about and researching a very different book. So Caleb 4 will be out in March next year. I've just finished the proofs of that. So that's Those Who Perish, and that is the end of that series of Caleb. I think I'm going to do a jump forward and do another little series, but I wanted a very tightly held, emotional arc to the characters. So that sort of ties off that those 4 books. So I'm about to do a book that I've been thinking about for years, which is actually historical fiction, it's sparked by, I think, rather than based on some family history set in the outback. I'm just playing around with characters and themes set between the wars. So it's going to be really different research this time. As soon as I can get over the WA border, I'm there.
Amazing. That sounds exciting.
Wow, that sounds great. I'm working on proofs of a book which is a more personal story. This time around, my partner had leukemia, and very, very fortunately he's in remission. But at the time our kids were 6 and 3, and I started to look for the perfect book to read them, which might kind of talk about mortality, which I guess is another way that these crime books do, but I didn't want a crime book for them. It's a book called Bedtime Story, which is really a way of looking at children's literature through the ages and entwined with our personal story, and trying to see how we talk to kids about some of these this very big question of life and death.
Wow. They sound amazing. There's a question now. So this is from Stella. I'll read it out. I spoke with Gary Disher once, who said that his books are always recommended for Father's Day, but he said the majority of his readers are women. Do you both know who your readers are?
Anecdotally, because I don't know the statistics. It's both, but I would imagine predominantly women, because women are the biggest readers, particularly of fiction. It changes a bit when you cross over into non-fiction. So yeah, I know a lot of men read my books, but yeah, I would assume the bulk would be women.
It's so funny because I don't know if, Emma, you feel like this, but I'm still astounded that anybody does read. It's sort of my work. I mean, it's just a thrill that it's published and that people do read it. So I don't know who they are, but I'm very grateful to them. But I think that most writers, when they're working, have a kind of ideal reader who is a sort of a composite person, maybe. And I perhaps need to interrogate, who that person is. But I have a sense of writing to for someone. Do you have that, Emma?
No, I have the exact opposite. I have to imagine that no one's ever going to read it and just keep convincing myself.
Yeah.
It's the only way I can be totally honest on the page. No one's ever going to read a word.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, but they are.
Oh my God.
So keep writing. Yes, definitely. What crime book do you both wish you'd written, and why?
None. No. I don't want to write like anyone else. I write because I want to explore things. So yeah, I don't want to be like anyone else.
No, great answer.
I really admire certain sort of plot devices. So I think, what a great idea, 10 Little Indians, the Agatha Christie story. Now, if that had been, if someone wanted to sort of hand that plot to me in a brown paper bag, and I'd be very happy to take it on.
I wish people would just hand over plots in a brown paper bag. I would
That's not how it happens.
As an answer to that question, give me the plot.
Yeah, that's right. Let's try and work that out. I'm going to see you on the 86 tram.
Yeah.
You'll only know me because I've got a carnation in my lapel, Emma.
Yeah.
I suppose we can tie this up into one question. I guess, do you guys have a favourite author, and what are you currently reading?
I'll let you go first.
Oh gosh, why do I never predict that there's going to be this question? Well, I'm really enjoying reading Emma's book, and I'm a bit worried that this fourth book could be the end of the series from the way you're describing it. So I hope that there'll be a fifth. But I'm actually reading a book that I'm loving, which is about a history of mazes. So I guess if you like twists and turns, it sort of makes sense that you're interested in labyrinths as well. And that's something I'm really, really enjoying.
Oh, how delicious.
Yeah.
Look, I love so many authors. I could never call one my favorite, and I go through phases. So if I want something really big and juicy, I'll read something like, oh God, her name has escaped me. Wolf Hall and
Hilary Mantel.
Thank you, Hilary Mantel. Only one of the biggest authors in the world. Can't remember her name. So like something like that, just love it, love it, love it. For crime fiction, there's just so many names, Peter Temple and Gary Disher, who you mentioned a minute ago, are fantastic. Well, I have just read The Tall Man, not The Tall Man, I read a while ago and loved, The Arsonist, loved it. And I have been doing a lot of rereading and rereading Elizabeth Strout's Olive Kitteridge and My Name is Lucy Barton, which are not at all crime novels. They're like the opposite of crime novel. Nothing happens in these books. It's been beautiful. And I've also just read an advanced copy of a book that's coming out next year by a new debut writer, Australian writer called Danuka Mackenzie, who's I mentored a little while back, and it's going to be great. I think crime readers will love that. It's called The Torrent by Danuka Mackenzie, coming out early next year.
Amazing. Well, there's some great recommendations. I think that might be our time up, which I'm really sad about because I feel like we could keep talking forever, but I'm sure you guys have lots of writing and important things to do, and wrangling children, as we discussed before. Just for everybody that's joined us today, thank you so much for your questions. Really appreciate it. If anybody would like to read either Emma or Chloe's books, we have the whole Emma Caleb Zellick series so far, not number 4 yet, in our library in Daisy Audio, and we have Chloe's books, The Tall Man and The Arsonist, available to loan. So you can search for them in the catalogue and add them to your bookshelf. But of course, get in touch with the library if you would like to have some assistance in borrowing those titles. I'll just remind everyone of the library number, 1300 654 656, or you can email library@visionaustralia.org. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks especially to Emma and Chloe for your time and for your generosity with your answers, and providing us just an amazing snapshot into to how you work and your stories and all of the magic that happens. We really look forward to having lots more exciting author chats in 2022, and everyone can kind of look out for those details in our newsletter as that happens. And for those we won't speak to, have a wonderful rest of your 2021. Crazy to think that it's almost at the end. Probably all pretty happy that that's the case. I know I certainly am. But thanks again, everyone, so much for joining us.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.
Vision Australia logo. 3 navy blue ovals linked together diagonally within a bright yellow rectangle.